eyeballs or testing?
Testing.
Minty fresh eyeballs, minty fresh eyeballs, minty fresh eyeballs.
Are we all here? Good afternoon from the Ohio State House, and on behalf of the Capitol Square Review and Advisory Board, welcome to the atrium on Capitol Square. My name is Chris Matheny. I'm the Historic Site Manager here at the Ohio State House, and this is my colleague, Katie Montgomery. And you know, Katie, it has been since February of 2020 since we've hosted We've Known Rivers here in person. It's been that long, and it's good to see actual people here. And speaking of actual people, I see Tony Gibbs right back there, the founding member of We've Known Rivers. Why don't you stand up and let's give him an applause, if you would.
Woo!
All right, or stay seated for a seated applause back there. He is.
There's Tony.
Speaking of other folks that are here, Katie, do we have some visitors?
Yes, so today we have Sunrise Academy. So we want to thank you guys for coming. You can give them a round of applause. Heck yeah. Awesome. All right, and we also have Trinity Lutheran School. Thank you guys so much for coming.
All right. We have some thank yous we'd like to get out of the way. Of course, we'd like to thank our friends at the Ohio Channel. We are streaming live on Facebook. Our special events crew who got the atrium all set up for us, thank you so much. And of course, the master of sound, Mr. Pete Fink, is in the house along with his associates, Chris and anybody else back there? Nope, that's just Chris.
Just Chris.
Thank you so much. If there's a problem with the sound, see those gentlemen. All right. So our oh, I almost forgot to mention, at the end of today's presentation, we usually like to set aside a few minutes for questions. So if you have questions that you would like to ask our presenter, have them ready. All right. Katie and I will be circulating through, and you can just raise your hand and we'll come over to you. All right. Our performing artist today is the newest member of We've Known Rivers, that dynamic group of storytellers with a passion for history. Lynn Ford refers to herself as an Affrilachian storyteller, drawing on stories that are from her ancestors in Africa and blended with elements of Native American heritage and European American family folktales in Appalachia. Learning these handed-down stories gave Lynn a sense of independence, and she in turn shared these same stories with her children. Lynn is also an accomplished author. 2 of her books won the National Storytelling Resources Award. In the past year's continuance of safe at-home work, Lynn decided to return to playing with poetry writing and took a chance on submitting 3 pieces in the fall of 2021. Big surprise. All 3 were accepted for publication. You'll find Lynn's poetry in the upcoming publications I Thought I Heard a Cardinal Sing, Ohio's Appalachian Voices, scheduled for publication next month.
Yes.
And the journal Tomorrow and Tomorrow, the spring 2022 birth issue. Ladies and gentlemen, students, Lynn Ford.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been telling stories for a long, long time. I am 70 years old, and my mother said I started telling stories at the age of 3. At that age, the stories were often called lies. They never got me out of trouble, but they used the gifts that my family had given me in spoken word, also in reading, because by the time I was 3, I could already read. I'd figured out that the marks on the page had meaning from the words that had been spoken to me by my family. I'd spent most of those first 3 years of my life in and out of the hospital because I was a very sickly child. Because of the conditions that I had, I am partially deaf in my right ear, but that also means I'm partially hearing. It just depends on your attitude about the whole situation. And I didn't know what a gift I had until I found when I started school at the age of 4 that I could already read, that I could already print. It wasn't very clear, but I could print. And that I could already tell stories. But I didn't start putting my stories into books until I was an adult with grown children. And the first book was called Affrilachian Tales, to honor the heritage of my family in the Appalachian region. Affrilachian means black Appalachian. But most of us also have a heritage of indigenous cultures, for me, Cherokee and Choctaw, and as well as European American, Scots, Irish, German, French, and English. That's my Affrilachian family. The book immediately won an award, so I put out another one. And I called it Beyond the Briar Patch. The briar patch is a place of thorns and sweet berries. And in a lot of stories that are rooted in primarily West African heritage, the rabbit, sometimes the hare, lives in what's called the briar patch. You know it as a berry patch. But it's a place where he is safe. It's a place where he can nourish himself. It's a place where other creatures can't bother him, and he can leave and go beyond the briar patch and return to it to be nurtured, to be safe, and to be helpful to his own family. So I thought that was an important title for me. And since then, I've written several other books, and every one of the books, or stories in the books, have won awards, and I'm grateful for that. And I started looking into other authors in the state of Ohio, other authors of African American heritage, because I was preparing a speech and I needed to know more. And I found so many that hadn't been recognized, who weren't well known, who deserved more honor and respect. And from that came the readings that I'm going to share with you today, as well as perhaps another book. But I thought we'd start with a story rooted in my family's heritage and traced to West Africa. And this group over here already did the opening one time, so sit up like the kings and queens that you are. We're going to begin right there. When you sit up like kings and queens, you get more oxygen into your lungs, always good for your brain and your heart. Put up one finger, once. Let me hear you say that. Once upon. Once upon a time. A time passes. A time is coming. A time will never end. As long as we share, as long as we share, as long as we share the stories. You have just learned a call and response that is hundreds of years old, and the oldest variant or version of it actually comes from the area that is now Liberia in West Africa. I got it from my auntie, who was born on the island of Aruba, and because I wanted to know, I learned more about it, just as I wanted to know more about the spoken word and the printed word in the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio is sometimes referred to by one of its nicknames. How many have heard the state of Ohio called the Buckeye State? Raise your hand. How about the Buckeyes of the Ohio State University? Raise your hand if you know that one. How about the birthplace of aviation, which is in debate with North Carolina all the time, but we got the Wright brothers, okay? How many have heard the state called the birthplace of aviation? Not many. Look it up. How many have heard the state of Ohio called the heart of it all? Great. That's why I put out my heart patchwork quilt, handmade with hearts to represent the state of Ohio. Now, in 1984, the Ohio Division of Travel and Tourism created the slogan, Ohio, the heart of it all, in order to promote tourism. If you look at the state of Ohio, it's shaped kind of like a heart, not completely, but kind of like a heart. And the tourism folks wanted people to know that there's so much available in the state of Ohio. Zoos, museums, performance spaces, art galleries, metropolitan and state libraries and parks, and some of the finest hospitals in the United States are right here in the state of Ohio. But in the early 2000s, the Ohio Division of Travel and Tourism created a new slogan, Ohio, so much to discover. It was meant to replace Ohio, the heart of it all. But they kind of go together because there is so much to discover in the heart. There is much diversity, both in the people and the possibilities in the state of Ohio. Still, there are many lesser-known treasures left to be discovered, and among them are a number of African-American narrative artists from the past as well as in contemporary literature. Poets and playwrights, novelists and essayists, spoken word artists. My research began with my own interest, but it continues because there's so much that I personally don't know and so much that the world, beyond the circles of folklore and literary and academic arts, needs to know and to honor. So we're going to begin by sharing. To speak names from the past honors those names. To speak names of the present honors them too. To speak both honors our foundation and our future. And there are many more names than I have on my own list. As man sows, so shall he reap. In works of fiction, such men are sometimes converted. More often in real life, they do not change their natures until they are converted into dust. Those words were spoken and written by Charles M. Chesnutt. He put them into a book called The Marrow of Tradition. But how many of you have heard of, Charles W. Chesnutt? How many of you have heard of Charles Waddell Chesnutt? Raise your hand if you know that name. Just a few. He was an author, an essayist, a political activist, and a lawyer. He was best known for his novels and his short stories, exploring complex issues of racial and social identity in the post-Civil War South. Now, 2 of his books were adopted into silent films. Silent films, no words. You see the action on the screen, but no one is talking. You have to read the screen too. My grandmother used to play the piano for the background music for those silent movies. And some of them you might see on channels like TCM these days, including some that were written by Charles Waddell Chesnutt and created by the African-American director and producer Oscar Micheaux. Now, in a speech delivered in 1905 to the Boston Historical and Literary Association, and later published as an essay titled Race Prejudice, Its Causes and Its Cure, Chesnutt imagined a stone-by-stone dismantling, tearing apart of race antagonism, and he called for full civil and political rights for all African Americans and all people in this country. He concluded his remarks that day with the following statement made 58 years before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his I Have a Dream speech. Looking down the vista of time, I see an epoch in our nation's history, not in my time or yours, but in the not distant future, when there shall be in the United States but one people, molded by the same culture, swayed by the same patriotic ideals, holding their citizenship in such high esteem that for another to share it is of itself to entitle him to fraternal regard. That means if you are a part of our country, you are brother and sister to everyone in our country. When men will be esteemed and honored for their characters and talents, when hand in hand and heart with heart, all the people of this nation will join to preserve to all and to each of them for all future time that ideal of human liberty which the fathers of the Republic set out in the Declaration of Independence, which declared that all men are created equal. The ideal for which William Lloyd Garrison and Wendell Phillips and Senator Charles Sumner lived and worked, the ideal for which Abraham Lincoln died, the ideal embodied in the words of the book which the slave mother learned by stealth to read. Learned by stealth? You could be killed for learning to read in the times of enslavement. Learned by stealth to read with slow-moving finger and faltering speech, and which I fear that some of us have forgotten to read at all, the book which declares that God is no respecter of persons, and that of one blood hath he made all the nations of the earth. The title of that essay, Race Prejudice, Its Causes and Its Cure. Mr. Chestnut was born in Cleveland, Ohio. And although his life took him to many other places, he died in Cleveland, Ohio in 1932, and he is buried in Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland, Ohio. But how many of you knew his name? Not many. You might know a phrase from this verse. I know why the caged bird sings, ah me, when his wing is bruised and his bosom sore, when he beats his bars and would be free. It is not a carol of joy or glee, but a prayer that he sends from his heart's deep core, but a plea that upward to heaven he flings. I know why the caged bird sings. And many people associate Why the Caged Bird Sings with Maya Angelou, a wonderful poet, a brilliant mind, but the words are the words of Paul Laurence Dunbar, a poet from Dayton, Ohio. He became one of the first African-American writers to establish an international reputation. In addition to his poems, his short stories, and novels, he also wrote the lyrics for the musical comedy In Dahomey in 1903, the first all-African-American musical produced on Broadway. The musical later toured the United States and the United Kingdom. He was born in Ohio, but he suffered from tuberculosis, and in those days there was no cure. So he died at the age of 33 in Dayton, Ohio. Now, Dunbar is one of the best-known writers from Ohio. Less known is his wife. Her name, Alice Dunbar Nelson, because she did marry again after he died. He was married to her from 1898 until his death in 1906. But theirs was a terribly stormy relationship because Paul Laurence Dunbar was abusive. He was violent. He was depressive, and he was an alcoholic. And how did he become an alcoholic? Well, in those days when there was no cure for tuberculosis, the doctors prescribed whiskey for his ailment. Drink this. It will make you feel better. And he drank it, but he didn't feel better. And he didn't get better. And his relationship with his wife was a very stormy one. Yet Alice remained married to him until his death. After his death, she married Robert J. Nelson, a poet and an activist, a civil rights activist. But she already was a poet, a playwright, a journalist, and a political activist. And she was an author in the Harlem Renaissance. She died in Philadelphia, but her marriage to Dunbar connects her to the heart of Ohio's black writers. And she longed for women to do more for the heart, not just of her states, but of the world, without the restrictions and constrictions of the time. For example, she wanted to be able to help others. But women weren't expected to travel far. They weren't expected to write and be published. They weren't expected to do anything but the chores of the household. And she wanted to do more, and she wanted to encourage women and others to do more. So she wrote this poem called I Sit and Sew. I sit and sew, a useless task it seems. My hands grown tired, my head weighed down with dreams, the panoply of war, the martial tread of men grim-faced, stern-eyed, gazing beyond the ken of lesser souls, whose eyes have not seen death, nor learned to hold their lives but as a breath, but I must sit and sew. I sit and sew, my heart aches with desire, that pageant terrible, that fiercely pouring fire on wasted fields and writhing grotesque things. Once men, my soul in pity flings appealing cries, yearning only to go there in that holocaust of hell, those fields of woe. But I must sit and sew. The little useless seam, the idle patch, why dream I here beneath my homely thatch, when there they lie in sodden mud and rain, pitifully calling me, the quick ones and the slain. You need me, Christ, it is no roseate dream that beckons me, these pretty futile seams. It stifles me. God, must I sit and sew? She was politically active. She organized for the women's suffrage movement in the mid-Atlantic states, and she acted as field representative for the Women's Committee of the Council of Defense in 1918. She also campaigned for the passage of the Dyer anti-lynching bill of 1924. And in her later years, she published poetry in black newspapers such as The Crisis, Ebony, and Topaz, and Opportunity. She also edited the Dunbar Speaker and Entertainer, and with her husband, Mr. Nelson, she co-edited the Wilmington Advocate. Yet, up to this point, how many of you had heard her name? I don't see any hands up on that one. There is a story of 3 young men who are walking down a path. They're on their way to the marketplace, and they're dressed in their finest clothes because they want to meet their friends, they want to talk to some girls, and they want to do some shopping, and it's going to be a wonderful market day. But as they walked along, talking, they didn't notice 3 others coming up the path from the opposite direction. Now, one of those young men was big and strong, and one was lean and quick, and one was a storyteller. And when they made their way to the place where that path met the road that led to the village and the marketplace, they noticed the 3 coming from the opposite direction, 3 young, hungry lions. And they looked at the lions, and the lions looked at them. And the one who was big and strong said, I'm not afraid of you. I can get past you and go down that road. I have the strongest muscles and I can fight you, but I see those big old muscles in your legs. And I see the claws. And I see those teeth, and I think I'm gonna run. And whoosh, he made his way, not down the road, but through the forest beside the road as quickly as he could, leaving the other 2 young men standing there looking at the lions. And the lions looked at them. And one said, well, I'm not as big and strong as my friend, but I'm pretty quick, and I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do the same thing he did. I'm gonna run! And he ran through the forest, not down the road, made his way through the forest to the marketplace, leaving the storyteller alone at that crossroads. And the storyteller looked at the lions, and the lions looked at the storyteller. And the storyteller tried to greet the lions. Hello? And the lions greeted the storyteller. I'm not big and strong like my friend, said the storyteller, and I'm not lean and quick like my other friend, who may not really be my friends, thinking about this situation, but I know I can't get away from you. I know I can't fight you. So could I do for the last time the one thing that I can do best? Could I tell you a story? Well, even lions like stories, so the 3 lions sat down on the ground and rested there and waited for the story to begin. And the storyteller said, once there were 3 friends who were on their way to the marketplace. They were dressed in their finest clothes because they were going to meet their friends and maybe talk to some girls and do some shopping in the marketplace. But as they made their way down the road, they didn't notice at first that there were 3 others coming up the other path. Now, one of those young men was big and strong, and one was lean and quick, and one was a storyteller. And when they got close enough, they realized that the 3 coming toward them were 3 lions. Well, the one who was big and strong, he ran. The one who was lean and quick, he ran. But the storyteller knew he couldn't run quickly enough, and so he stood there looking at the 3 lions, wondering which one of those 3 lions was going to get to eat him. You see, he wasn't particularly big. He didn't have a lot of meat on his bones, and he wasn't enough for all 3. And so he just waited and wondered which lion would eat him. Then the storyteller stopped talking. It's good to know when to shut your mouth. And the lions looked at him, and they weren't grinning anymore. They were starting to glare, and then they looked at one another. They seemed to be taking in the story and the meaning of that story. And they started to snarl, and they started to growl. And they decided who would eat the storyteller in the way that young lions would. They bit at one another. They snarled and fought. They scratched at one another. They tore at one another. And while those 3 young lions fought, the storyteller backed up, turned, and made his way through the woods. Now, when he got to the marketplace, his 2 friends were standing there crying, "Oh, he's gone. He's dead. He was such a nice person, but he's gone. He's gone." He's walking toward the marketplace. And they asked him, how did he manage to get away from the lions? And he told them what he had done. Now, one friend said, I am big and strong, but my words are not big and strong as I am. Sometimes I don't even know what to say. And the other one said, I am lean and quick, but sometimes my words come too quickly, and no one understands what I want to tell them. Then both of them said to him, You teach us. Teach us the power of telling a good story. Now, on another market day, there were 3 young men walking to the crossroads to go to the marketplace. And they were dressed in their finest clothes, just as before. One was big and strong, one was lean and quick, and those 2 were learning from the storyteller. And that's a story about why sharing your stories is so important. Now, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper learned to share her stories at an early age. And she published her first book of poetry at the age of 20. She became known as an orator, second only to Frederick Douglass in her prominence as a black writer of that era, at a time when women, particularly black women, were not expected to have either an education or a voice. She moved to Columbus, Ohio in 1850. And here she taught what was known as domestic science, not home economics, domestic science. There's a science to running your home. She taught at the Union Seminary, a school affiliated with the African Methodist Episcopal Church. She began writing what is now known as anti-slavery literature. She joined the American Anti-Slavery Society and began a long career as a public speaker and political activist. She spoke as poet, she spoke as essayist, she spoke as novelist. And on her many tours, she spoke of enslavement, of civil rights, of suffrage, and of the right to vote in political elections, that everyone should have that right. She was the most popular African-American poet before Paul Laurence Dunbar's poetry. She died at the age of 85 in this month in 1911. Yet before this day, how many of you had ever heard her name? In the poem Buried in a Free Land, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper wrote, "I would sleep, dear friends, where bloated might can rob no man of his dearest right. My rest shall be calm in any grave where none can call his brother a slave. I ask no monument, proud and high, to arrest the gaze of the passers-by. All that my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in a land of slaves." Now, we've been talking about the past, but as I did my research, I found out more and more, and there were some names that I knew, some people that I knew, that I added to the list that was created by the Ohio Center for the Book at Cleveland Public Library to celebrate Black History Month last February, 2021. There's a statement at that site that still says something very important. We encourage you to explore well beyond this list. Consider this only an enticement for you. When I say the names, please repeat the names after me to honor their voices. Hanif Abdurraqib. Born and raised in Columbus, he's famous for his poetry, for his essays, and his nonfiction. His 2021 essay collection, A Little Devil in America, Notes in Praise of Black Performance, has received the 2022 Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence. Rita Dove. Born in Akron, she was the United States Poet Laureate from 1993 to 1995. And she's won numerous awards and honors for all of her work. Sharon Draper. My friend. She was born in Cleveland. She's a multiple Coretta Scott King Award winner and a recipient of a whole list of other awards. Her latest book, Out of My Heart, has been on the New York Times bestseller list for about 13 weeks now. She is also a fellow member of the National Association of Black Storytellers. Nikki Giovanni. Grew up in Cincinnati. She's known for her work as an author, a poet, and a social activist. She was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, but she grew up in the state of Ohio. She taught at The Ohio State University. She's one of the most important voices of poetry known around the world. This is an excerpt from one of her poems called Poem for Emma. Sometimes I see things that aren't really there, like warmth and kindness when people are mean. But sometimes I see things like fear and want to soothe it, or fatigue and want to share it, or love and want to receive it. Virginia Hamilton. How many of you know Virginia Hamilton's work? Ooh, you got some reading to do, honeys. She was born in Yellow Springs. She died in Dayton in 2002. She's one of the world's best-loved and most honored authors of children's books. The annual Virginia Hamilton Conference on Multicultural Literature for Youth continues her legacy. Some of her books are In the Beginning, The House of Dies Drear, The People Could Fly, and there are many, many more. Will Haygood. He's a journalist from here in Columbus. His 2018 book, Tigerland, 1968 to 1969, A City Divided, A Nation Torn Apart, and a Magical Season of Healing, was the runner-up for the 2019 Dayton Literary Peace Prize for Nonfiction. And the 2014 film, The Butler, was inspired by his article in the Washington Post called A Butler Well Served by This Election. Langston Hughes. He's considered a giant of American literature, and he grew up in Cleveland. He wrote novels, short stories, plays, poetry, and essays. The Weary Blues, published in 1926, was the first book by the man who became known as the poet of the Harlem Renaissance. And that collection includes not only the title work, The Weary Blues, but also his classic poems, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, which gave our storytelling group its name, We've Known Rivers, and I Too Sing America, which was the theme of the 100th anniversary celebration in Columbus of the Harlem Renaissance. Toni Morrison. She's important in American literature, not just the state of Ohio. She died of pneumonia in 2019, but her stories still live. She wrote Beloved, Jazz, Song of Solomon, The Bluest Eye, to name just a few of her works. And among her numerous awards were the Nobel Prize in Literature, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. Nnedi Okorafor. She is Nigerian-American, born in Cincinnati. She's best known for a sci-fi fantasy series called the Binti series. She writes fantasy and science fiction for both young readers and old readers, and she has won the Hugo Award, the Nebula Award, the Eisner Award, and many, many more. Debbie Rigaud. She's a New York Times best-selling author of romantic comedy novels for young adult readers. She and her family live in Columbus, Ohio. She wrote Truly, Madly, Loyally, that was inspired by Meghan Markle, now Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, and it became a Junior Library Guild selection. Her book, Hope Project Middle School, was co-written with actor and activist Alyssa Milano, and it became an instant New York Times bestseller. And A Girl's Guide to Love and Magic should come out this year. Jacqueline Woodson. Born in Columbus, she's known for her young adult fiction, and she won a MacArthur Fellowship in 2020. She's best known for a book called Miracles Boys and her Newbery honor-winning titles Brown Girl Dreaming, After Tupac, and others. After serving as the Young People's Poet Laureate from 2015 to 2017, she was named the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature by the Library of Congress for 2018 and 2019, and she received a MacArthur Fellow in 2020. Dante Woods Spikes. He's an artist, an author, and a community advocate. And his first book, So Long, Unfinished Goodbyes with the Children of COVID-19, came out just in the past few months. Scott Woods. Some of you may see Scott working at the Columbus Metropolitan Library, but he's the former president of Poetry Slam Incorporated, and he co-founded the poetry series Writer's Block. And he developed a place called Streetlight Guild that's on an arts venue on East Main Street here in Columbus to focus attention on local art and underrepresented voices. Some of his work, Prince and Little Weird Black Boy Gods, and Urban Contemporary History Month poems, in which he has a poem that is called, the style is called a canto, but it's developed from the first lines of Stephen King's stories. Rita Fuller Yates. She's an author and a historian from Columbus, Ohio, and I think she's the only historian that I know who makes history amazingly popular on a daily basis. You can find her on Facebook, you can find her on YouTube, you can find her on the news, and her book, Columbus Black History, Images from Our Past, Volume 1, came out this month. Those are contemporary authors, people of now. And included on that list at the Ohio Center for the Book in February of 2021 was, and I couldn't believe it, Lynn Ford, your speaker for today. I live in Columbus too, and I write on a daily basis. And you heard that my poetry is now being published. And I began writing to honor my family, to keep memories alive, to encourage others to share both their personal stories and their creative writing, as well as the folk tales that might be in the roots of their family. So I've given you a little bit of what I have discovered about the many voices of narrative among African American authors in this state, the heart. I'm going to end with one more, and I'd like for you to pat on your legs to help walk into this. You sat a long time, and I appreciate your listening. This is the sound of Grandmother Turtle walking around the world. She's carrying a very important message. She wanted to spread it to all the creatures, but there was a problem with this. You see, she stopped and she tried to give the message to the lions. She said, "We must think and act as a world united, or face our demise. We must live together with respect. We must treat one another with kindness, peace among us. Peace as sisters and brothers, peace." And the lions, what did the lions do? Let me hear you roar like lions. Those are some sad lions. Let me hear you roar like lions. Much, much better. And they told her, "Go away, old turtle. We're not interested. We're only interested in the lions." So she kept on walking and carrying the message. And she gave the message of peace to the leopard. And the leopard looked at her and said, "Why should I be friends with an antelope? Why should I make peace with my meal? An antelope is only a feast." So Grandmother Turtle kept on walking. And she tried to give the message to the wild boar. The wild boar said, "I'm not worried about peace, especially with the hyena. Them's the ugliest babies I've ever seen in my life." Ooh, she tried to give the message to hyena. Hyena only laughed. Peace. With the boar? Have you seen those things? So Grandmother Turtle kept on walking, carrying the message to wolf and fox and to the people. To the people, and you know how the people have been toward one another. Yet she keeps on walking. She keeps on walking, carrying a message of peace. She's carrying it today, and some are beginning to listen. Listen to a message of peace. She said, "We must think and act as a world united, or face our own demise. We must live together with deep respect, treat one another with great kindness, peace among us as sisters and brothers. Peace, my children, peace." And that is the end of my stories and my reading for you today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Can you, I noticed that you brought 2 of your books with you. Can you just give us those titles real quick?
Afro-Latin Tales and Beyond the Briar Patch.
Beyond the Briar Patch.
And these are my first 2 books. There are several more now. Yay.
Yeah. Excellent. Does anyone have a question for Lynn? Anything they'd like to